I am very excited about my next guest and her new book titled Gilded, Breaking Free from the Cage of Ambition, Perfectionism, and the Relentless Pursuit of More. Out in hardcover today, author Keren Eldad is here. Known as Coach Keren, she takes high achievers out of the futility of constant pursuit and into the greatest levels of success and fulfillment. Her coaching clients range from Olympic athletes to Hollywood stars and special forces operatives to renowned global organizations like J.P. Morgan and Nike. She's the founder of The Club, a community of leaders, entrepreneurs, and coaches who encourage and support each other to reach their fullest potential and to make their greatest contributions. She's been recognized as a top 10 executive coach and maintains gold standard coaching credentials on top of her advanced academic degrees from the London School of Economics and the University of Jerusalem. She's a former C-suite executive who's lived and worked in 17 countries on 4 continents, coaching leaders all around the globe in 4 languages. And with over 500,000 views on her TED Talks, I'm so thrilled to have her here today in harmony with us. Welcome, Coach.
Thank you, Heather. Wow, I sound mad impressive. Thanks for that.
You are really mad impressive, which, I mean, where do I begin, right? That's my job. I'm going to begin, I guess, which is right where we start. And the question is, with this resume and with all that you've achieved, I want to talk a little bit about why you decided to write this book. Yeah. And why was it now? And what did you feel as though you wanted people to get out of it? Like, what did you learn that you knew people needed to know?
Yeah.
What was this about?
So Gilded, which means not real gold, only covered in gold, is exactly what the book is about. It's about the experience of my life and the experience of many of my clients' lives that look so shiny and so fantastic from the outside, so successful. That resume, my God, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? But then doesn't actually feel good on the inside. And that's because for many of us, the way to success is ambition. And ambition is in and of itself a trap. It's a trap that comes with overwhelm, with perfectionism, with relentless pursuit, with exhaustion, with burnout, with just enormous Faustian devil trade-offs that we make. And we end up as such in a gilded cage. That's the big image that's on the cover, right? A gilded cage that's open. And this is an analogy for what the book offers, which is the promise of breaking free of those illusions and redefining success. Now, I'm not necessarily saying there's anything wrong with ambition or success, but there is something wrong with the definition that traps you. We want to redefine this around meaning and happiness and purpose, because as I always say, if you get success without fulfillment, you've actually gotten failure.
Right. Yes. Wow. Hang on to those words for a hot second, because when you started, ambition, success, ambition, drive, those are all positive words. We're taught positive words. But in essence, when you're on the hamster wheel, is what I'll call it, of that kind of pursuit, then what falls away is sometimes the meaning of why you got on the hamster wheel. Yeah. You're not really having fun pursuing something, which is, I think, really important in life to enjoy what we're doing. But sometimes for someone like me, I needed to be that way because it served me at a time in my life, and then it stopped serving me. Yeah. And, so let's talk a little bit about where did you come from with this book? Because you and I have talked before. And one of the things we talked about very quickly as we got into a conversation was suffering. Yeah. The idea of suffering and the idea of ego and suffering within the ego. But I want to talk about the suffering because usually it takes us some sort of trauma, tragedy, suffering, awakening to make a change. Yeah. Recognize something. Tell us your story.
Well, actually, let's unpack that first with you, if it's okay. I think the thing that you said that was so telling was I was doing that and I was using all of those hustle patterns because I was getting something out of it. And then it stopped working. What are you talking about particularly? Tell the listeners what stopped working. What did you notice? Because that was likely the suffering.
What I noticed was my drive, my inability to just let it be for a minute. You know what I mean? I had to get the answer. I had to get to the next place. That drive was just annoying. I was driven and, I wasn't for me, it was annoying because I felt I was the only one pushing all the time. I felt like no one was ever on the line with me.
Yeah.
And I felt it was lonely,
It's so lonely. Yes. And it starts to also basically eat you up, right? It starts to consume you, the anxiety, the exhaustion, the resentment,
disappointment,
the
resentment.
disappointment. It doesn't feel the way it's supposed to feel. You're like, you reach the summit of this mountain and you go, really? This?
Right.
And that's a feeling that a lot of people know. There are also more aggressive cases. Ariana Huffington, as you know, was driven all of her life and then one day collapsed on her own desk from exhaustion and had a concussion. And that was the only way she started to wake up to the fact that this is not how you're supposed to live. In my case, there was a couple of other aggressive things. I'll describe it like this. In 2011, 12, find myself at the apotheosis, the summit of all of my dreams. I had done everything right, Heather. I went to the good schools. I stayed thin. I did everything my mom taught me to do properly. Yeah. These are silly things, but I'm trying to paint a picture for people. I had married a guy who was tall, which, as we all know, is the American dream. And we looked great on Instagram together because our outfits always matched. So from the outside, everything looks fantastic. The house is gorgeous. And I have a C-suite job with a prestigious company. Done. Checklist. I'm in my baby 30s, like literally just broke through to my 30s. So I have made it. Many people came up to me constantly saying, oh my God, you're so lucky. I mean, I remember that phrase all the time. Congratulations on that award. You are so lucky. Unfortunately, from the inside, the picture was completely different. I was in an abusive marriage. My marriage felt horrible. It was like that movie Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia Roberts. And that's not hyperbole. I was living in fear constantly. I was under terror and threat. I was constantly criticized for being fat, which is kind of a weird thing to say to someone who weighs 120 pounds on a good day.
Yeah,
and
it's abusive.
It was abusive. It was really, really nasty, and it was horrifying. The job was okay, but it was definitely not what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't feel lit up from within every day. And I was living in Zurich, Switzerland. If anyone's ever been there, you know that that's where death goes to die. Like for a New Yorker, that is like the most boring place on the planet. Gets dark at 3:00. The restaurants are closed at 8. It's awful. And by the way, if I would say no disrespect to Zurich, but I'm very comfortable with disrespecting Zurich. It's just a tragic place. For someone who's lived all over the world, I can comfortably say that would not be top
you do
of my
have
list.
some experience.
Yeah, exactly. Go to Buenos Aires, you'll have a good time. And so basically, all of this looks perfect on the outside and looks enviable on Instagram, but feels absolutely catastrophic inside. And this is when I start to awaken to the fact that I think I've taken a wrong turn here. And I think this is something that a lot of my clients arrive at, particularly in the midlife crisis, which is I've climbed up the ladder only to realize that this is the wrong wall.
Right.
And this is where we start to feel real suffering, Heather, because we start to understand, at least subconsciously, that the sunken costs are going to be wasted. If we have to start over, we literally have to start over. And when you already have a lot of success, that's really hard to admit. Because you're going to have to basically discard an enormous amount of work that brought you to this point. And all I have to say is, listen to Heather. It's over. It won't work anymore. You can keep trying. You can keep throwing yourself against that wall, but you will find a wall, not a door. And hopefully, if you want to find a door, you're going to accept the uncertainty and the work that you'll need to do in order to arrive at the other side, which is what I did next. And I'm so glad that I did, because my life 10 years later, 12 years later is just a completely different life.
And believe it that it can change. Believe it that you can achieve it. Believe it that it is around the corner. And I think one of the first questions to ask, and you said it's poignant, like if I'm doing so well, why don't I feel like it?
Yeah.
You know, everyone else is telling you that you're doing so well and how congratulations, but your own inner truth, your innermost truth, whether it's hiding an abusive relationship or abusive situation, or whether it's living a life that's not authentic to you.
Yeah.
So how do we, so as the first question someone needs to ask themselves is, you know, am I happy? Or is it, well, yeah, so that's an easy way to do it, right? But also, is it, how am I showing up in the world? And do I like the person that I am and that I see? And that was the switch for me. Like, I didn't really like the person I was anymore because I wasn't running, a multi-million-dollar company. I didn't have 52 direct reports, and yet I was acting the same way.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And so I didn't like who I was. And then I realized that it wasn't only the acting the same way, it was, you needed to have different actionable patterns to get new results, because the old patterns weren't I wasn't getting what I wanted.
So you felt self-awareness around two components. The first was you didn't like how you were showing up and how you were appearing with other people. And number two, you did not like the results. These are very useful bits of information. People can start with that. I think the easiest thing for overachievers is actually not to look at themselves. They think they're self-aware. According to Harvard Business School, HBR, Harvard Business Review, you're maybe 10 to 15% likely to actually be self-aware. So maybe get off your high horse for a second. But what you can recognize readily and is data-driven is your results. Just be honest. Is this really the life I wanted? Are these the results I want? Am I where I think I should be? And most people, if they're honest, will say, no, I am not. I do not have the caliber of marriage. I do not have the caliber of relationship. I am not as comfortable within myself as I think I should be. I am not as comfortable financially as I think I should be. I have not achieved what I'd like to achieve. This is really useful. In the book, in the very, very first chapter, I literally take you through a questionnaire, a brief questionnaire that no one will ever see. Don't worry. It's just between you and you. To answer a few questions and get real about how you feel too, not just about your results, but also how you feel on a day-to-day basis. This will make it much clearer for you whether you are in fact satisfied. And here's why, Heather. Most people would not have been as readily, openly available to your conclusion. Most overachievers, we pride ourselves on being okay and having it together. So if you asked me back then, are you good? Are you happy? I would have said, absolutely. I'm one of the happiest people I know. That's all bravado, all confidence. Of course, I did not want to admit what was really going on with me, but I definitely didn't want to lose face, even to myself. I was not capable of doing that. That's where all of the work comes in. Now, you have two choices here. The first is read books like Gilded. Start doing the work. Start reading Brene Brown and Martha Beck and Eckhart Tolle and hit them hard. Or if you can, hire a coach and do the full work. The second option that people are going to like a lot less is trauma.
Yeah.
Just wait. Don't worry. Life is going to mess you up. That's what happened to me. I'm delighted that it did. It was horrifying to go through it. I not only went through a nasty divorce. Can you imagine how contentious it was with someone like that?
Yes.
Both my cats died. I lost all of my things in a fire, and that was the stuff that he didn't take, because in Switzerland, you could just take your property. And
and another little insight into Switzerland. This is where the divorce.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, last country to give women the right to vote. Just saying. Worst place to get a divorce, worst place to be a woman. Warm hugs, Keren. Most interestingly, worst place for a feminist. The situation was really, really aggressive for quite some time. And then when I moved back to the States, I also found that I couldn't find a job for quite some time. So I'm broke already. And I'm in a really, really aggressive downturn of my fortune. This was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was the first time I couldn't weasel my way out of things. I couldn't outsmart or outwork the problem. I had to face myself. And that's when all the self-help books start to appear, and the weird things like going to Kabbalah and Tony Robbins start happening. And little by little, my life starts to change.
We talked about this also when we talked before about the self-help book, quote unquote, and how people who were overachievers like you and I, and who were, hitting these markers of success, and everybody was telling us how great we were and how wonderful our life was. That overachiever in us has got this, I don't know. It's just not real. It's just like
we find it super repulsive. Let me be frank with you for a second, Heather, because you and I are real people and cool New Yorkers. The reason why my cover is so chic and why my credentials are so brushed up is actually very useful, because it allows people like us to pick these things up without feeling shame.
Yes.
I've
Self-help
heard how
book.
I heard how my clients talk about me. It's always like, oh, she's like so academically sound and everything is super credentialed and this is a respected person. And the reason is our universe, the universe of self-help, is actually still seen as woo-woo and
Yes.
not particularly chic. For those of us who are academically inclined, um, to read a book like the first book I read, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was for sad people who have serious problems and need to fix those issues. Now, I know that we've come a very long way. In the last 10, 15 years, therapy and coaching have become far more ubiquitous. I'm so happy about this. Many more of us, including real brainiac academics like Brene Brown, are openly talking about the depth of the work and how much it's done for us. But back then, 2011, 2012, for a novice like me, this was something to scoff at. So I'm really happy that I broke through that little problem I had and started picking up books with weirder and weirder titles. Some of them, for example, You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. Oh, my favorite, Why Your Life Sucks and What You Can Do About It by Alan Cohen. Like, for me to carry something like that on a plane, Heather,
Yes.
used to be so like, I hope nobody's watching and
Oh,
nobody thinks that I'm crazy. And now I'm like openly walking around with those books.
that's right. I used to hide them. I 100% of the self-help book. It would
Yeah.
like, look around my shoulder at the airport. I'd grab it, throw it on my arm, like, twill through it in the book and then read them like Bibles,
Yeah.
and then put it in. Now it's like they're on my bedside table. They're all over my house because they're like reference books for me.
Same. I am not ashamed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They
So
changed
you
my
really,
life.
so you wrote a self-help book and a pretty cover.
I wrote it with a cover that I think will make it easier for you to reach for it when you're at Hudson Booksellers.
Exactly. You won't have to hide like we did.
Yeah.
We're here to help you. We're here to help you break your barriers. Okay. So let's just go back here. So when I spoke to you, it's so funny because I write these words down and I've written them down now 3 times: trauma, suffering, success, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things you talked about is, you get to the summit, you said, and you're like, what the heck? Why am I here? Right. So for my mountain climbing, part of my work to try to understand who I was is I got into high altitude mountain climbing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things that we say as mountaineers is it's really not about the summit. It's really about the journey. It's about picking the route, preparing for the trip. It's not about the summit actually at all. And so if you look at our lives, as overachievers, if you look at people who are driven like that, it's never about the journey. It's always about getting to the next achievement, getting to the summit, reaching the next pinnacle. And,
yes, exactly.
Right. And there's so much that's really missed in the middle of that.
Yeah. Well, let's think about what you're trying to do when you're doing that. The best word that you and I discussed yesterday was perfectionism. And that is the summit of summits, or the addiction to summits, the addiction to outcome. The addiction to outcome makes you want everything to be controlled and to maintain a certain outcome level. And that means that the journey will naturally just not matter to you at all. And that's because what you're trying to do is trying to avoid trauma and you're trying to avoid suffering. Let's just be clear about that. So in mountaineering, you have had to, yes, you have learned along the way that the journey is the joy of the process, but the only way you could get there was by embracing the uncertainty, the suffering, the struggle, the hardship of the actual act of mountaineering, which I have to tell you, as a Jew, is not something I'm likely to embark upon anytime soon. I'm afraid of everything. This brings me
You like the warm deserts.
yeah, exactly. Like if it's a nice flat Mexican desert.
I'll meet you in Palm Springs.
Exactly. With an Aperol spritz, I'll be there. What Eckhart Tolle said that really resonated with me way back then was there is no coming to consciousness without suffering. And in that moment, I realized that that's what I'd been avoiding all my life. All that overachieving was about avoiding suffering or pretending that I could outsmart suffering. I could cheat a life of any kind of aggressive outcome. And in so doing, I was numbing myself to the suffering that was actually happening. When you start to be able to then instead, through self-help, through inquiry, through self-knowing, embrace suffering, you reframe it. That's when it becomes wonderful. That's when the glory appears to you in the exact same journey that you were working before, right?
Right. And the idea of it is the journey, the steps that you have to take to get through the suffering. So you know, like Ram Dass says, you know, you're mourning, go mourn some more. You know, you're not done yet. You're not ever going to be done yet. You know, you got to continue to do it. And I remember somebody said to me once, I was going through a very difficult time. I really felt like flat on my back, and I was wallowing in it. And that person said, go wallow some more, because you're not going to last long wallowing.
Yes.
You're going to wallow until you can't wallow no more. And then you're going to do what? You're going to get up and you're going to take another step and you're going to start over. And I think that that's part of the problem that we as humans experience, and especially the perfectionism, the overachievers, is that the human existence, talk about evolution, talk about self-help, is about suffering. It is part of the journey, right? You say you can't escape it, but yet we all try so hard not to get hurt, right? But a lot of people don't even love because they're too afraid of getting their heart broken.
Most people,
right?
Yes.
So we live in fear of failing.
We just live in denial. Let's talk about grief for a second, because you brought up mourning. That's actually what the midlife crisis is. It's a process of grief. This is the death of a former identity, and we're not willing to let it go, which is what makes it a crisis or aggressive. Most overachievers will spend extra time here. And the reason for that is they're not willing to go to depression. And that's exactly what the morning consulting friend said to you. Don't worry, it won't last that long. Most people don't believe me when I say that. The depression portion is the shortest portion of grief. Most of us, particularly overachievers, spend way, way, way more time in denial and in anger. We don't even get to bargaining. Denial and anger take up the most of our time, and that aggressively keeps you out in the grief process for much longer than you should be in it. But what if you just allowed yourself to let go? What if you allowed yourself to feel sad for all that was, for all the missed opportunities, for all the mistakes, for all the pivots that you took that led you down a path that was not useful to you, for what is now gone? What if you let yourself actually grieve? You would start to, for better or worse, very quickly float back up to the surface, and soon enough start feeling frisky again. And there it is, a new beginning.
Yes, it's a new way. I mean, for something like mourning, something like death, losing someone, which is so permanent, it feels so real. You know, for me, that process of mourning is learning how to love that person in a new way. Learning how to have them around in my life, but just learning a new way of communicating with them, learning a new way of having them present in my life.
It's a new beginning, but it's also a new beginning with yourself.
Yes.
You're getting to know you without them.
Right. Without them telling you, you know what they would say, you know what I mean? And that's also self-awareness. It's very true. It all comes back to self at the end of the day. Now, let's talk about something that's not mourning, but something like that's a tragic loss of something else, be it a job or a relationship or something like that, where people are really feeling devastated and depressed. What, you know, we always say the mourning is, like you said, is the shortest part, or, you know, it's not how you hit the mat, because we're all going to go down. That's one of my favorite quotes. It's how you get back up. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the people that really have a hard time getting back up once they've been knocked down.
It takes time.
Especially the overachiever, because
for overachiever, well, I mean, they look good. They definitely make it look like they're aggressively getting back up, but unfortunately, they're carrying their neurosis with them. Gilded aims to really help you to stop getting back up artificially and actually let yourself go fully down so that you can really resolve the root issue and then come back up. Let me give you an example. Classic overachiever example. And this has happened several times in coaching. They get divorced. They do 3 months of coaching. Like, they've begun to scratch the surface. They decide that they're 100%. They announce that they're getting married again. And I'm always sitting there going, okay, cool, awesome. Really looking forward to that. I'll see you in 1 year, max.
Right.
The reason is we've not solved the real problem. We have tricked ourselves into thinking that our cuddle buddy is the solution. This is simply a substitute This is a fata morgana. This is yet another illusion. You're just trying to reach for something because it's too painful for you to go all the way down. That's okay. I call these first attempt. It happens to everybody. If instead you really, really want to get back up again, take your time. Take your time. Feel the loss. Start to find yourself in the loss and not dislike yourself in the loss. Start to realize that you will be good even if you lost everything. That you would be good even if you gained 20 pounds. That you would be good even if you lost your youth. My God, that sounds like an Alanis song. In my case, when I started to really to really come to a full understanding of my value is not diminished. Just this thing is gone, but my value is not diminished. Then my resurrection was, I mean, it's amazing how fast it is.
It's unbelievable. Let's unpack that a little bit. So what we feel society or others expect of us, or what we expect of ourselves because that's what we've been told or taught, becomes this internal struggle oftentimes, because I would say 99% of the time, maybe I'll say 90% of the time, you're not finding passion. You're not finding drive from something that's innately you, authentically your inner truth. And so there's this internal struggle. And what I found, if you don't listen to the voice inside your head, that's telling you, I'm not really happy. I don't really like this job. If every single day you get up for work and you don't want to go to work, like those are things you have to listen to.
It's true but you're right. You're working against some aggressive conditioning. My conditioning is called Mrs. Eldad. That's my mom. Shout out to mom. Who, whenever I fell off the stilts in like PE or something, would say, it's okay. You're fine. Just get up. Just get up. And or every time I fell off my bike. And what she was not dealing with, which is okay, it was the 80s, they didn't know, was that I'm terrified of heights. I'm terrified of bodily harm. And that was only exacerbating it. So we were not dealing with the root problem. We were just teaching me to get back up. A person who learns how to just get back up, overachievers, they just learn to go harder at things. And if you go harder things, it makes it much worse. As I like to say to people who are struggling with sex, if you're bad at sex, don't do it harder. Just take a freaking break and start to understand what's really going on. And that's why the frustrating component of this answer is not just take a look inside, but really follow the work. My book is kind of unusual because I structured it like one of my coaching programs. I want to take you step by step, right step at a time. This isn't the kind of book where you like open to a random chapter and see. No, you're going to go through a process and I will work through every single piece of this so that you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. That's the only way through it. Like childbirth, you're going to have to just endure the pain.
Embrace the suck, as they say.
It'll come out. Don't worry.
It's going to come out. Exactly.
No baby has ever been left inside.
Never. And speaking of mourning, death is purely safe. And so we don't have to worry about dying because it's totally safe. Or people die.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, I've come to terms with it in many ways. My mother was very sick a few years ago, and I've lost several friends, unfortunately. I've come to see death as a fake experience, a transition of energy. Yes. And I've come to recognize, I even talked about this in my first TED Talk. What do I know? I mean, like, with due respect, it's pretty arrogant for us to make the decision that they don't exist anymore just because we can't see them. What if we just are not listening properly? What if that's what's happening? And that gives me enormous comfort.
Yes, me too, because I listen to them all the time and I ask the questions and just like they're normally here and laugh with them or enjoy things with them. And that was not always me. I mean, I was, as a young girl, it was very final and scary and weird. I came from a big Italian family and everybody was old. So everybody died. You know, when I was a little girl, everybody was dying, dropping like flies. And I'd go to all these open casket,
you guys have really serious funerals. I know. I mean, it's terrifying.
Like, yeah. Although a Jewish burial is beautiful. So I recommend it to everybody.
Yeah. And it's really quick too.
Unbelievable. Yeah, exactly.
It is. It's literally
mourn for a long time. The Jews are onto something.
We mourn for a long time, but we bury immediately. And I thought that I've always found that very, very useful.
I do too. I actually like that. That's what's so incredible about different cultures and learning about all these
And
different.
there's no open casket, which I think would be so creepy.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy.
Yeah.
Although for, you know what you know, for people, a lot of
Yeah.
people to see the body to believe the finality of it. Like they can't just poof be gone. They have to
Yeah.
actually see it to believe it. You know, to each his own. We are
To each
all
his own, of course.
bio individual, of course. But I want to talk a little bit about individuality, and I want to talk a little bit about perfectionism, and I want to talk because we're going in a million directions, but going back a little bit to the journey and going back to the summit. So when we push through life, like you and I, like bang through, like we miss a lot along the way, and but I do believe that in the time that I was powering through, the things that I was missing weren't important. So I do believe that we're in times of our life for reasons. But what I wanted to talk about is change, the word change, because people don't want change, but nothing, literally nothing stays the same. We're changing right here before each other while we're seeing, we can't see it, to your point. You can't see my cells exfoliating off my body, but they are. Yeah. And I'm changing. And each day I'm actually slowly dying.
I know.
Slowly dying.
But you and me too, sister.
Right? All of us. That is the human condition.
That's
that is
the condition.
Human condition. So let's talk a little bit about perfectionism. I want to talk a little bit about change and our inability to accept it. And I want to talk about the ego, who you call Satan. Because those three things.
Satan. Yes. It's very church lady. Satan.
Together for me a little bit.
Satan, and just imagine the echo. All right, so let's talk about change for a second. That's the big problem, right? And that's what perfectionism is coming against, the suffering that comes through change. And it's really the denial of change, which is why perfectionism is at the heart of all mental illness. It's literally an attempt to control that which is uncontrollable. Life is not controllable. Whenever I see somebody in one of my seminars going, no, it's fine, I will always control my weight and I will always control my bank account, I'm like, oh my God, congrats, you must be dead. Because that is literally not possible. Right. So perfectionism is the denial of reality. And here's a very important distinction for all the overachievers listening. It's not high standards. High standards are wonderful. I love them. I'm a huge fan. Eat well, listen to Heather, get your hair done, be lovely. However, perfectionism hurts. Perfectionism is when you turn against yourself, when if you don't uphold your standards, you start beating yourself up and, God forbid, judging other people or beating them up for not measuring up to those standards. That is perfectionism. It's aggressive. It's an aggressive state. It's a state of anxiety because it can never be fulfilled.
That was the piece of me, the person I didn't like. I was so intolerant of other people, of the classic that if people can relate to this is like when you want to finish someone else's sentence. I remember early in my life, like in my 30s, when I was in my pinnacle doing all this stuff, like I remember having to sit on my hands, you know what I mean, to remind myself to listen and not finish other people's sentences. And then when I was able to adapt that skill, I was super proud of myself now that I was a good listener. Right. But I was still a perfectionist.
Because again, you're wrapping yourself around identity. Anyway, it's super common. Don't worry. You're not a bad person. You're not mean. Nobody's mean. It's literally that you are learning that everybody else is not doing their best. And it's your job to rectify this. It's just a form of arrogance. And it only comes from a place of insecurity, not from security. If you were truly secure, you wouldn't give a tiny rat's ass how everybody else was doing. It would just be different.
I don't want to cut you off, but I want to bring up Anthony Bourdain for a minute, who's I adore. And he had a real problem with mediocrity. And he would talk about mediocrity, and God rest his soul and bless him dearly. He's no longer with us and he took his own life. Yeah. And I just see that relativity. It just hit me.
Of course, he was in deep suffering. He was very likely in deep suffering. Again, it's just an inability to digest others. Just think about this as a lack of compassion or a lack of empathy for other people. And what it really is a lack of compassion or lack of empathy for yourself. That's what perfectionism is. Perfectionism is unforgiving. It is cruel. It is mean. It is like having a full-grown adult beating the crap out of a small child in your head, a defenseless child.
Yeah, because it's unachievable for that child to
unachievable.
be an adult. You're never going to be perfect. It's just it's an inaccuracy. Like the word almost shouldn't exist in a way because there's no such thing except for this right now is perfect to
So
me.
all you, of course, but that's because you and I have both done the work and we're having fun. But think about what it's like in your head. You're never good enough. I can't believe you messed up like that. My God, why did you say that? Ew, they're never going to invite you again. You are so fat. And basically, whenever we have those tracks in our heads again and again and again, we are always aggressively going to try to solve them because we're so uncomfortable. We're suffering so much. And therefore, change will be the least welcome thing ever because you finally get a grip on something and now they're changing on me. That's a hard no. Basically, you become super sensitive, super defensive, super certainty driven, and you're essentially playing. And this is the most interesting thing, I think, in the book for overachievers who believe that they're playing to win, like Michael Jordan. You actually become a defense player. You're not only not scoring your goals, you are actually living in a form of stunted mediocrity. And that's the most painful thing for overachievers to accept. And that's when they'll start to understand the reason your results are not ringing all your bells. The reason you're not where you should be is because of you. Because these aggressive tendencies are not only missing their mark, they're actually turning against you now. Now is when we can introduce Satan.
Yes, I was going to say this is the
love
perfect
Satan.
time for the ego.
Yes. So the ego, of course, is the Carl Jung concept of the alter self that we develop as children in order to form a divide, a distance between ourselves and very hard emotions. And so that we can present ourselves nicely to society in a way that's acceptable rather than be what we really are, because we learn very, very young that what we really are is pretty unacceptable.
Yeah,
Bingo.
stay in line, be quiet down.
Now, the ego keeps all of these things, all of these systems in check by basically abusing the crap out of you. And that's why I like calling him Satan. And yes, he is a man. Satan in Hebrew, my native language is Hebrew, means opponent. It doesn't mean devil with horns. I'm pretty sure you guys invented that. It just means opponent. If you play tennis, if you play pickleball, everybody in Austin plays pickleball. If you play any sport, even chess, you know that an opponent is not necessarily trying to kill you, right? But you do want someone who plays well enough that you'll get better. That's how I think about Satan. His intentions are actually not bad. The reason he's doing that is to try to help you to get better. And this is how we heal our relationship with an ego, a perfectionist ego that is trying to harm us and is very painful. And we turn him into an accomplice in our greatness. If instead of taking the bait, you look terrible, you go, hang on a second. I really don't, do I? I'm actually doing pretty well. You're just trying to get me to reconsider this jacket. This is a trite example, of course.
No, but it's real.
Completely transform your relationship to your ego, and your ego starts to become much more of a friend. We learn to live with the shadow rather than to have it constantly working against us and attacking us from within.
Yeah, I also the ego from the Course in Miracles, which I read. It's such an amazing. I read. It's a reference book for me. But the ego wants you to fail. The ego wants you to be mad. The ego wants you to suffer. The ego wants to tell you you're not good enough. The ego wants to say they didn't invite you because nobody likes you. The ego loves to do all those things to us, right? So how do we? So I love what you said. Like, how do you counter the ego to really be your friend?
Yeah.
Because
in two ways. Number one,
tell us.
By recognizing that he's there. That's why I named him. I remember there was a movie, I think it was in the 90s called Unusual Suspects. Do you remember Kevin Spacey and Russell Crowe before they got canceled? In that movie, and Guy Pearce, in that movie, one of the lines is, the greatest trick the devil ever played was making us believe he doesn't exist. To me, the moment I started to like switch it on and go, you're there, aren't you? And you're not me. You're different from me. The separation and the naming of that separation was step one. Step two is, you're actually not against me. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this information for good instead of for bad. Instead of taking the bait and letting it drag me down, I'm going to ask, how is this useful to me? What is the opportunity here? Just injecting that moment of mindfulness is the beginning of the reframe. Now, there are longer reframe tactics in the book that will help you inject mindfulness in any moment of challenge whether or not you see that Satan is driving the car. But for now, for anyone listening, if you've been a little mean to yourself or someone's been mean to yourself and you've been taking the bait, start asking just that question. Hang on a second. Is that me? Oh, that's not. That's you. Okay. Number 2, are you trying to kill me here or are you trying to make me better? I can actually use this, can't I? I promise you'll reach a different conclusion and you will
Love
become
that.
friends with Satan.
Are you trying to kill me? Are you trying to make me better? And the answer is always because the ego lives inside you, and that would be killing itself. It doesn't want to do that. That would be,
No.
killing itself. So it wants you to
That's
be
right. And
But
that's
I-
actually the ultimate goal of the ego. The ultimate, I like to say the ego's union. He's never quitting. So when you start to understand that, you got to make him a partner.
Well, it's funny because I looked at it differently, and I learned this through Ram Dass.
Yeah.
I think I learned this in his book, Becoming Nobody.
Yeah. Oh, that's the best one.
I know, so good.
Yeah.
But he talks about his ego, and I guess I copied him from it. He divided his ego into idiosyncrasies, and he lined them up. He never had children, so he said he lined up his idiosyncrasies like his children. And our children, for those of us who are parents, all have individual personalities. They're all very different. We're all bio-individual. So he would say during a situation, if fear showed up as one of his idiosyncrasies, he would say, well, of course, here you are. I knew you'd show up today.
In the beginning, what I would do actually was a mistake. I would say that to Keren. I would say, oh, Keren, you're being that again. You're doing that again. And then I started to realize, actually, it's not Keren. It's someone else. So you can call it idiosyncrasy, you can call it Satan, whatever you find most charming, go with it. But realize something, the ego is not you, and overachieving is not who you are of any sort. The real surrender is to nothing and is to nobody. We are a soul. We happen to be in a very attractive meat sack at the moment, but that's all it is.
Yeah.
We are nothing and nobody.
Our human suit.
This is a human suit with a blazer. That's all it is.
Exactly. And we get different suits. And I think that's part of our choosing. I think that's part of the choosing, to help us evolve as people. And that's, go read some more self-help books and you'll catch up to me on that one. Or then
you'll definitely go far if you read Ram Dass.
Yes. And there are people that are a million miles ahead of me, or Eckhart Tolle, or Thich Nhat Hanh, or any of these incredible philosophers and writers. And one of the things that you know about me, but my listeners don't know about me, is that my nickname that Jonathan, my husband, gave me when we were first married was OA.
OA.
OA. And what that stood for those of you who couldn't figure it out right now, being the podcast, it's overachiever. Because I was constantly overachieving. Like, it wasn't like, John would be good. Like, if he got one load of laundry done, I had to get every single thing in the house completed.
You had to be on Oprah right off the gate. I get it. Some people are just like that.
So one of the things I love was this great quote that you used, because it didn't resonate with me, which made me say, you need to learn about this. Perfectionism, this is the quote that you use. Perfectionism is just a haute couture word for fear.
Yeah.
What is it I'm afraid of? A failure?
So that's an Elizabeth Gilbert line. I adore
it's not
that
yours.
line.
Sorry. Elizabeth Gilbert.
And it spoke to me because of the haute couture, because I'm a giant ham who loves fashion.
Yes,
but it is.
I am.
Perfectionists are fraidy cats. They are terrified of not measuring up. They are afraid that if they do not measure up or they do not look a certain way, they will be perceived as less than. Yes. And therefore, they're constantly trying to conform. This is all fear. All of it is fear. So when somebody says to you, I'm not afraid of anything, and that's why I'm so thin and I'm always well dressed, you're kind of afraid of something. Now, ultimately, most of us are afraid of death. Of course, that's what Ram Dass has taught us. We're essentially denying death. But the perfectionism gets a lot more granular than that in the day-to-day life. You're mostly afraid of dealing with the feeling that is the most dominant in your life, which is shame. And the shame is around not being enough, not being good enough, not being Gwyneth Paltrow, not being on Oprah, not being the success that you think you are, not being this thin or this young or this rich forever. Now, the thing that starts to humble you is the realization that you will die, and that all of this is ephemeral, and that absolutely none of this is within your control, and neither is the judgment of other people. What we create before coaching is confidence. Confidence is garbage. Here's why. It depends on what you have, on what you look like, and it depends on what other people think of that.
Yes.
There are two problems with these things. Number one, as I just said, you will never be able to maintain your looks or achievements. Never. Never. Number two, it doesn't really matter because other people will interpret you from their perspective anyway. I remember watching the Super Bowl when Lady Gaga was performing, and I thought it was the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen. And I heard three gentlemen behind me talk about how chubby she was. And I was like, what? How did you see that? How did you even notice that? And that's my point. My point is it's so subjective. It's from where they're coming, these clearly flawed people,
Yes.
and it has nothing to do with you. If you can start to make this shift around understanding that you're just afraid and confronting your fear of your own humanity, of your own fallibility, of your own death is the way forward, you'll be more willing to do the work to come to terms with these rather big and seemingly abstract things.
Yes. I think one of the things that you said that resonated with me is moving past something where when you can't, okay, let me rephrase this. So one of the things that I am a fixer, right? So I like to fix it for everybody because I'm able, I have the ability. Yes. Some things that don't come easily to others come easily to me. And I want to give, I want to give. But as an empath, also sometimes you take on, and then you take on, this is also ego, you take on what is not yours.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think the fear is, Heather?
What is that fear? That's what
I'll tell you. The fear is that if you don't, you will not be useful.
I will not be useful. It's not that they'll fail. It's not that they'll be hurt. It's that
your ego will be obliterated. Your identity as a fixer, as a person with the power to fix, will be obliterated. Now, luckily, God has given you children. You know how fast you're going to learn that fixing has its limits? Pretty freaking fast.
No, I've learned I actually can't do anything right now. That's what I learned. Yeah. But thank God,
God gives us children, so death won't be such a surprise.
Exactly. Well, what's so funny is my own children will tell me this too, because, the internet is a wild thing, now your own teenagers will tell you what's going on in the world and what needs to happen with this one and that one. So with me and my perfectionism, which is never going to, will I ever fix it? No, I'm really kidding. No, what I was going to say is that the realization of what I learn and what I see changes. And so I want to talk about aging before we go, because what I want to—
the worst one.
I know, but but it's the best one. Because like,
good for you if that's how you feel.
Maybe I can, as you are enlightening me, maybe I can share and enlighten you in your beauty.
As someone who's beginning to experience perimenopause, I got to be honest with you. Yeah, I know why I don't like this.
Well, we'll have a podcast about it after, but I will take it line and talk to you about it because I'm 54 and went through it. And there is not enough information out there.
No,
there really isn't. And it takes Oprah and Gwyneth to talk about it, for crying out. And a lot more of us need, have voices in and can go through it, because it just becomes, it's not good to talk about, or you have generational, I had a woman the other day, I was at a restaurant and her daughter was talking about her hot flashes, and her mother was an older woman and touched her shoulder. She goes, honey, we don't talk about
my mother's, I have like 10 aunts. That's not an understatement. I actually have 15 aunts, not a single one of them discussing this openly.
Yeah, exactly. So back to aging and change and the ego and perfectionism and learning about it and what is serving you and when it's not serving you. And I started reaching in the same time you did, in my 30s, right when everything was supposed to be perfect for these self-help books.
Yeah.
So I don't think I was going to rest my perfectionism yet. Maybe I could have in my 30s. My overachieving, I certainly wasn't going to rest because I was still in the thick of it all. Mm-hmm. So when's the timing, Coach? Like, how do we help the youth that are listening, the young listeners?
Oh, no, we can't. No. Forget about them. No. Listen, I've worked with young people all my career. I began as a crisis counselor. That's code for suicide counselor. I still work with young people. I love them. It goes in one ear and out the other, and that's fine. That's because life experience will teach them way more, and they will remember, but they will integrate it most likely around the midlife crisis. The midlife crisis is the most ripe time to make these changes. It's roughly between the ages of 35 and 55. So it's actually a very broad range. For many people, it occurs around life circumstances. The children leave the nest, the perimenopause period, right? Like physical changes, et cetera, et cetera. The only problems arise when you meet moments like this, real aging. Aging is surrender. You have to surrender to it. There's nothing you can do about it. I don't know about you, but I didn't get my first migraine and think, I guess I can outsmart this. I really didn't. But many people do. Unfortunately, they move into denial as a first stage of grief. Denial is when we start dating much younger people and getting lots of surgery. These are examples, right, of things that we do in middle age. They are a cliche for a reason. It's because they happen a lot. And it's essentially saying to the world, I'm not going through this. I'm fine. I can delay this process. I will reach middle age when I'm 75. And you're like, you're not going to live to be 150. So maybe just give yourself this grace now.
Yes.
The surrender is the most important element of this, and it is much more likely for you in middle age because most of us are at least old enough to know that rebelling for a long time will not work.
So you really do need the life experience. I mean, because that is really the answer.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted it to be the answer, and I knew it was the answer, but I really wasn't sure because again, that's the fixer in me. I want to help I want to reduce the suffering.
Yeah. I'd love it. I mean, I'd love it if I meet young people all the time who believe that they understand the world. And I actually think that they definitely know more than we did. Yeah. They are much more exposed to therapy, but I still don't think that you can bypass life experience and wisdom.
Because
these are earned.
Generationally, everything changes, right? So what our parents told us, like, get up back on the ladder and try it again, get a stiff upper lip, turn the other cheek. Like none of those old adages work anymore. They have their own new adages, and the ones that are teaching me, they won't work on their children, God willing, when
but they will hopefully experience the same thing we did. There is no coming to enlightenment without suffering. There's no way to expedite this for them. You just have to allow them to live their life and to let life teach them.
And you're going to love this part. This is why I said the aging is the best part, because how lucky and blessed are we to be at this age to know and be able to look back at life and have this experience. So that's like, that's the golden years, right? The sunset, like it's not retirement.
No.
It's self-awareness, self-acceptance.
Yeah. It's true. And if I keep my sugar down, I'll probably live a very good quality of life forever.
Well, Coach, I can help you with those parts.
Yeah, I know.
You help me with the nutrition side. You help me with the overachieving perfectionism and breaking the terrible habits. I'm working at it though, kid. I'm working hard.
Same here. And I think it's all about what we said yesterday, which is staying happy. Just stay happy.
Well, I mean, listen, I could keep this podcast going for 100 million times, but there's all these things that the book is going to give you guys. And so there's ways that you can find that if you're going up the wrong wall, if you're halfway up the ladder and you realize I don't want to be on this ladder, there's all these different times in life where you've already achieved the top and then said, wow, this was not the summit I thought it was going to be. And so there's all these different times and periods in life that, thank God, Keren has the life experience and has had the trauma. I'm so sorry, but so grateful that you came out of it on the other side that much stronger, that much enlightened, and that much more equipped to help those around you. So thank you for that. And tell everybody where they can find you and where they can find the book and find your coaching services. And, tell us a little bit more about that side of your business.
With huge pleasure. So the book is available on breakfreewithgilded.com or just type Gilded into your Amazon. And my website is KerenEldad. It's really important to spell out Keren because I like telling people I am not a Karen. I'm a Keren. There is a distinction.
Another terrible society thing that
I know. Why couldn't it have been
Deborah? About adding stress to people that you have to worry about how your name is spelled. Her name is spelled.
The other day, there was a little kid that I saw him whisper to his mom, "Mommy, her name is Keren," and I was like, "Oh my God." I'm
You're
not
like,
a witch.
spelled differently.
It's just spelled differently. So it's Keren, and it's at Coach Keren on Instagram. So you can find me at all of those places. But in general, I really genuinely hope that anyone who needs this reads this. This is the book I wanted and needed 10 years ago. And it's a joy to be able to offer that to people now.
It's incredible that you know what you do and the work that you do. And I want to learn more about the club. I think I want to be part of the club.
It's
And
amazing.
I mean, literally, I love everything that you're doing to enrich yourselves. But really, another part of our purpose is that we're supposed to enrich this beautiful world that we're here for, this existence, and you know, making it a little better. And the only way we really, really do that, you guys, is right here with ourselves.
Yeah.
Has to start here. And I do believe, before I let Keren go, this evolution, like our kids, we might not be able to teach the youth, but we are changing, and sisterly, we are changing. We're changing. We're breaking barriers. We're changing things. And it does sometimes feel like we're going backwards. I know that, but we have to go backwards in order to go ahead. We have to suffer. Keren told us, Eckhart Tolle told us.
Yeah.
Say the quote again.
There is no coming to enlightenment without suffering.
I wanted to hear it from you.
And you know, it's like a sling. Like you pull back, and then forward.
Yes. Forward. And there you go. So 2 steps, 1 step backward, 2 steps forward, whatever you want to do your dance, do it for you. You count. We love you. And Keren, thank you so much for being with us. You guys go get this book, get out of your own way. It's going to feel real good.
Thank you. Thank you
you so much.